All right, so where we left off last time was still on Swift syntax. We did not get through that. I think we finished talking about sets and arrays. So I was like posed like a good question by someone. But basically the question was like, I think in the file I had written like let like my set be like a certain set, right? Um and so as we learned, let is like a constant, which means like my set couldn't be changed, but then I said you can like add things into the set though, and it's like confusing because it's like, hey, but we're changing like what's inside this set. Isn't that changing like, set, even though you used a constant? And the answer is yes, but no. As in, yes, you're like changing the contents of the set, but you're not changing, or sorry, you're changing the contents of my set, but you're not changing the fact that it's pointing to the same set instance, right? Um, and so as long as like you don't reassign my set to be like set two, for example, like that's still valid. Like you can like add and like remove things from the set because you're not changing like the instance of my set, even though you're changing like what's inside. Okay, so I just want to clarify that. And all right, so right, so those are basically like the essential like primitive types of like Swift. And so I want to talk more about some more like Swift specific or like iOS dev specific things. And so the first thing I want to talk about is optionals. So basically, like an optional is something that can be nil, but you don't know if it's nil or not until like you're actually running the app. And like let's say like your IDE is like running the app and like it reaches like a nil like variable. Like what is it supposed to do? Like so that's what like optionals are like supposed to like sort of like protect against and help with dealing. Um and so there's two ways to like show like what happens when like you have a nil. And so first is using like the operator, like the question mark operator, the optional operator. But basically it just means like it's okay if this variable is nil. Like it may be nil, and if it's nil, like do not like quit the app. Right. And so as you can see here, all you do for this is just like add like the question mark essentially after the variable. And the exclamation point operator will basically be like, okay, if this value is nil, like just like terminate the app because it's like not supposed to be nil and something is wrong. Or it's like you can like force unwrap something as well, which means like extract the value out if it isn't nil. And so that leads to the whole question of like, how do I like unwrap something that could or could not be nil? I don't know, right? And so there's like three options for how that works. So and you'll see these like frequently like documentation or just like if you're on Stack Overflow. And so it would be good to like go over it. So the first option is like the guard let statement. And so that's going to be like the safest way and like also I think the most common way to unwrap essentially a variable that could be nil. But as you can see, all it's like pretty straightforward. You're just saying like just think of guard as like if almost, so it's like if you let like my image be unwrapped to like let's say unwrapped image, right, then like outside of like these braces, if it like doesn't go in here and like print unwrap failed, that means like the wrapping is successful. So basically here you're only handling like the case in which it inside the brackets, you're only handling the case in which there was an error unwrapping. And usually, you could like throw like some sort of like fatal error or something, or you could just like put like a print statement unwrap failed. Okay, yeah. So I got a request to zoom in on my screen. All right, let's see. I don't.
You can go to Mindy. You can go to display settings and system preferences.
Display settings.
Yeah, display is on the bottom left. and then go to, I think, arrangement. Or oh yeah, actually it's gonna be that one. Scale to larger text, but it looks like you're already on the biggest setting.
I think you can go to Xcode and just do Command plus and it to zoom in for you.
Oh, that works too.
How is that? Is that better for everyone? Or should I do more? Is this good? Okay. All right. I'm assuming that's good. Yeah, just yeah, feel free to like unmute as well. So as I'm not looking at the chat that often. But right. Okay. So basically the guardlet is preferred because it like it handles the case in which it errs. So if it doesn't err, like you're not really, you can just like proceed with your code as if like what you wanted happened, basically. And so like option 2 is like instead of handling like the error case or like catching the error case, it'll catch like the case in which it succeeded, right? So that's just like replacing like the if statement with like, or sorry, the guard statement with an if. And so like inside the brackets, you would handle like if the operation actually succeeded. And then I guess like another like less, I don't know, more explicit but like less like nice looking way of handling this is just like being like just straight up checking if my slider like isn't equal to nil. Then like like just like unwrapping it essentially. So yeah, so that's how optionals work. Does anyone have any questions on this? Because this is like a big concept in like Swift, and you'll probably come up like if you make it like a Swift app for Blueprint, it'll probably come up.
What are the applications? What are the applications of this in the actual?
What are the applications? Right. So for example, so let's say like you're trying to load a page, right? Or like load a screen. And let's say like the thing you're trying to load on that screen depends on like data you're sending from like another like view, basically. But you don't know if like the data has been sent yet, for example, like when you pull up like the view, or something like that, right? Then like when you're running it, like if your data hasn't been sent yet, like it's gonna be nil. And if like you're not supposed to have nil things right anywhere technically, so it's like once you're like the app realizes that something is nil, like it's gonna start freaking out, but you don't want it to like crash, right? So you're gonna try to handle that case, in which like perhaps like data isn't loading as fast as you expected it to. Does that answer your question?
You can think of it as like anytime you're calling something that might throw an error, like maybe you're making a request to an API and the API returns an error or something, but you don't want your app to crash because the data that the API is returning is nil. Or even if you're just like getting a value out of a JSON object and you're like using an incorrect key, a lot of other programming languages would crash, but in Swift, you can just use an optional to check before accessing a nil value, essentially.
Yep. Thanks, Jack. So yeah, Jack's like a resident ex-Apple like /Swift dude. So yeah. All right.
No, that's not true.
All right, Joseph.
Oh, can you talk more about like unwrapped versus wrapped like values? Like I'm still kind of confused with that.
Right. So are you saying like option 1 versus like option 2, for example, or?
Yeah, like so. I guess like our optionals just used as like a placeholder for something that is unknown, like any variable type or.
Yeah. Yeah. Essentially, like they're just variables that can be nil. Like I wouldn't call it placeholder exactly, but it's like sort of what Jack was saying, like if you're like trying to get data from like an API or something, but like let's say like you're not fetching it like for some reason, like you want to be able to like catch that case. So like whenever like you say like let's say you have a data variable, like you would just want to declare data to be like an optional just in case it is nil. because you never know when that could happen. So I wouldn't call it like a placeholder, but like it's more like a safety net, perhaps. Yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
I guess kind of, but so I just have a follow-up question. So let's say you had the like going back to the example of like fetching data from an API, right? So
Right.
what would be like a difference between just making a variable like making like I guess instantiating a variable but not actually like giving it a value, like if you just say like let something variable as opposed to like making an actual like optional.
Wait, so it's like, what's the difference between like using an optional in that case and not using an optional?
Like what would be the difference if you just made a variable that would hold that that data that you're going to collect versus make an optional to hold that data?
I can answer this. So the basically, if you made a variable to hold that data in a different programming language, there's a chance that the data is going to be missing. Maybe the key is missing from the response, or maybe the value is just null. And before you continue using that code in another programming language, you would have to check if the value is null before you continue, because if it's null, you can't use it. So in Swift, it's essentially doing the same thing. It's just checking if the value is null. It's just that the syntax for it in Swift is a little different, and support for it is like built right into the language. Does that answer your question?
Not exactly, but I think I'll ask later on, or I'll do
Sure.
more searching into it.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
worries. Feel free to ask in the chat too.
Okay. So are there any other questions about optionals before I move on? All right. Okay, so then we'll go over functions and errors really briefly, and then spend a little more time on structs and classes because those are going to be essential. So function, I'm assuming all of you guys have like written a function before in some language. They're basically the same in Swift, just like, you know, the syntax is a little different. So you'll use like the function keyword, the name of the function, and then inside you'll like define like what type your parameters need to be. So this is once again similar to like more static typing languages like Java and like C, but right. So you'll have to define like the name of the parameter and like the type you expect the parameter to be, and then like also if it's going to return something, you want a return type. Otherwise it's like void. And then inside the function, you know, do whatever you need to do. It's pretty straightforward. And to call it as well, you need to like explicitly define like what parameters you're feeding into it. For example, here, like if I want variable 2 to be like refer to like the param, then I need to like say param refers to like variable 2. So that's something to keep note of. We're gonna see an example of where like you actually don't need to put like the name of the parameter in a special type of function, but we'll go over that later. Error handling. So I think this is like pretty similar to like Java, for example, but just you do like a do catch statement, so it's like almost like try catch. So right, so just like try to execute something, and if it's wrong or if some errors goes on, like inside the catch block, you'll just like, I don't know, like print like a debug statement or like print like another function like handle error or something like that. So yeah, error handling is also pretty straightforward. All right, and so now moving on to like classes and structs. So yeah, so these are you're gonna be seeing a lot of in at least like UI kit. And so how many of you here have like worked with like object-oriented programming before? Just like, I don't know, quick like Zoom hands or something. Right. Yeah, so that's about like a third of you. And that's totally okay if you haven't. I'll just go over it kind of quickly. But it's object-oriented programming is like a fancy way of saying like like, I don't know, like classes and functions and inheritance and stuff. So essentially like what a class is it like lets you like almost like prototype, um, like, prototype something, for example. Like it could be like class hackathon, in which like hackathon has like variables, like properties essentially of like name, location, host, participants, right? And then functions to like access its properties, like get participants or update participants, etc. And like for example, you could have like student as well, or like participant and like participant or hacker, for example, here. And hacker could have you know, properties like what's the name of the hacker, or what year are they in, what like track are they in, etc. So yeah, so that's a class. And so like a struct is almost virtually the same thing. If you look up here, for example, here I defined like a struct hacker. And so like, right, so they so structs I don't allow for functions, but they do allow for like properties, as in like variables. So for example, like name, ID, track is checked in or not. And there's a reason for why we don't allow for functions other unless it's like a mutating function in structs and like versus class. So basically like classes are reference based objects, which means like they can inherit like properties from like, let's say like subclasses, among other things. But like for structs, for example, those are value defined, which means there's like no inheritance, and they do not contain like pointers, for example, to like a parent or something. And that is a lot at a time. So I'll take questions. All right. So I think Pratiti has a question.
Oh no, sorry, my hand was just up from the.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah. So right. So as like written around here, like 198 to 200. So both classes and structs can define properties, methods, etc. But classes can inherit while structs cannot. And in that sense, structs are immutable. And therefore like each instance of a struct is independent of another. And I guess like to see like an example of this, because it's like it's hard to like, you know, understand when you just say, oh, one of them is like reference based and the other is value based. Like, what do you mean by that, Mindy? Like, yeah, it's kind of hard. So let's do like this example over here. So let's say I have like a class X, right? And class X has a variable name that's private, so it's only, so which means if it's a private variable, only like places inside the class can like access name. And so in order for like places outside like the class X to access the name, you have to like use these like getters and setters essentially. So here we define an instance of class X known as A, and like we'll say like A's name, let's call it hi. And then we say let B equals A, and then you change A's name again and set it to be bi. And so in this case, since X is a class, can anyone tell me like what B's name will be set to if I type in like B dot get name? Anyone want to take a shot? You can also just type it into the chat. So I have it in the chat. Okay. So I'm getting mixed answers. I'm getting hi and bi. All right. So okay, so yeah, so like I said, I'm getting hi and bi. And so all right, so then let's try to draw something and like explain it perhaps. Okay, I think I'm gonna draw it. All right, so all right, so you have, let's call this A, right? And A is an instance of X, and it has property hi. And let me actually erase the A up here, and instead let me draw A like this. Okay, here we go. And so what you do when you say like let A equals X is basically you're just telling A to like point to an instance of X, of the class X, right? So A is now pointing to this instance, specific instance of class X, and it has the property that it has like name equals high. All right. Okay, does everyone get this part? Okay. So then when you say let B equals A, what you're saying is let B also point to the same instance as A, right? So whatever A is pointing to, like B also points to that now. And if A is pointing to this object over here, then now B also points to this object, points to the same object. And so, right, and so now when you say A dot set name is by this object that A is pointing to, right? Let's use like blue or something here. You're gonna like cross this out and then you're gonna set it to be by now. All right, so then now based on this diagram, can someone tell me like what B dot get name would be? Right. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of buys in the chat, which is good. And yeah, so the answer is going to be by in this case. And why is that? Because classes are reference types. So like I said, basically what it means is when you set like class like B equals A, for example, you will set it to point to the same object in memory as like whatever A was pointing to. And so if anything changes in A, B is also going to reflect that because it's pointing to the same thing in memory. So right, yeah. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, cool. Then I'm gonna clear the screen for a sec. So B dot get name will return by. But like let's say X instead of being a class, it were a struct. Then what would like B dot get name return? Right, yeah. So if X were a struct, B would refer to like a different, or sorry, B dot get name would be high. And that's because essentially instead of like because structs are not like pointer based, right? Instead, what would happen is when you say let B equals A, it would be, where's the eraser? It would look something like this. Basically inside the program, you would, it would just like make a copy of like whatever in like instance of X, right? A is referring to at that time. So it was originally high, right? And so when A dot set name goes to by, right? Like A dot get name is going to be by, but B dot get name is still going to be high because they're referring to different types, or sorry, different instances of memory because it's not reference based for structs. So yeah. All right, so that is the end of like Swift syntax. Does anyone have any like questions about this? All right, so I hope that was clear then. But yeah, so those are the differences between classes and structs. As for like when to use them, I'd say like personally, I like for I guess like on bigger like objects that I would like need to like manage. I usually like use like classes to manage like structs, for example. So for example, like class hackathon managing like a struct of like hacker. Like if I'm not really changing the variables, or like manipulating them or like pointing, like then I would like use a struct over a class. So yeah. All right, and so yeah, so for example, here's like example use case of like how to like initialize a new struct for hacker versus like a new like class for like hackathon. Yeah. All right, so now that we're done with Swift syntax, I just want to quickly cover some like basic UI elements we're going to be using. So if you go to your home view controller, which hopefully everyone has, you will see now that it's got some like code in it versus last session. So let's like just try running this actually. So how to run this, you will just like go up here. And so you see like right now I have like iPod Touch like 7th gen selected, and then from here you can like sort of like run it on like whatever device you want. I'm just gonna go with like a 12 Pro because I'm like fancy. But yeah, so and if you bring up the canvas screen, which you can once again do, just a reminder from these like top 3 buttons here on the right, if you just click on the middle one and just click canvas, it should like display like a little like screen that'll allow you to like preview what you have written essentially in the code to the left. And it, like it's the if it's the first time your code is like building, then it might take a while. So yeah, so it took like 1.3 seconds for me, as you can see up there, and now it's trying to load. And all right, so I'm just gonna go over really quickly some basic UI elements that you will probably be using in your project. So all right, so inside the code, you can see like in lines like 13 through like 16, we have defined here like some like global variables essentially that can be accessed inside home view controller. And so what we're saying is we're saying, okay, let's add a label, a UI button, and a text field and an image view. And you haven't configured anything yet. But like, let's just say we're going to configure them later, which is why let's add them here. And so view did load is like the function that every UI view controller is going to inherit and is going to have to override. So override is essentially like evidence, I guess, of like inheritance. Because as you can see here, I'm defining a new class home view controller that is a subclass of UI view controller. So I'm defining like an instance essentially, a child of UI view controller. And because like I define like a child of like a more general like class, I might need to override some of its methods. And so view did load is one method you will like basically always have to like override if you want to make a UI view controller, because what view did load does is like it basically it's this method is called like the first time the view is loaded. And so in here, you basically just want to like set up what your user is going to see the first time they like this view is loaded on their screen. And so, right, so first, like in order to display my label, like, or a label or a button, for example, you need to add the subview like into like the main view. And I guess like this is like a mobile dev concept, but essentially views are like what will be displayed. So I guess that makes sense. And so basically all these like late UI, anything like with like UI in front of it, right? Like label, button, text field, image, all that is like inherits from view. And that's why it's called a subview. But right, so in order to like let's say like add like on this view controller, right, on home view controller, in order to like display something, you need to add these like subviews onto like the home view controller like main view. So these 4 lines are important. Don't forget to include that, or else whatever you define is not going to show up. And then down here, like I think we're configuring form first, right? And so form is going to be the red thing over here. Let's make it like a let's make it like, I don't know, like purple or something. I don't know if that's it. Dot purple. All right. And so, right, so now you're like basically, these are just like properties of like each UI view you can change. So you can change it to like its background color, you can change its edges, right, like you could just be like dot line, for example, and then you don't have a border. But yeah, so and then you can like, if for forms specifically, you can like change like whatever placeholder text you have there. So etc. But like let's say I comment like this stuff out. Right. Oops. Well, okay, let's pretend I commented that. There, I forget like the commands. But anyway, so now you see that like, like nothing's showing up. Like what? You know, like where'd my form go? And well, if I were to comment this stuff out, like none of this would be shifted up anyways. But basically, actually, does anyone like let me sorry. I'm trying to like comment. Okay, well, if I were to, because this is like sort of important, so I'm just gonna go through like manually do this. All right. Right. So, anyways, so now like you'll see everything is like shifted up. Like where'd the form go? And so that's because like you need to like sort of like format your form on the screen, and like one way to do that is you can say like, my form dot like I think like dot like rectangle or something, dot like boundary bounds, dot like dot like size or whatever is. You can like set like essentially like the bounding like rectangle of your UI view, and that'll like be like, oh, that then you'll need to like specify like where the x coordinate is, where the y coordinate is, its height and its width and whatever. And that's like inconvenient, right? Because like if you want your app to run on like many different, like as you can see, many different devices, like the the point like 100 like xy is not on this gonna like be placed in the same place on like an iPhone like 8 versus like an iPad, right? And so usually we don't want to like define bounding recs like that. Instead, we want to use like anchoring. And so what this does is it essentially allows you to like position elements relative to each other, right? And so what you need to do for that is like in line 30, you need to like first like essentially disable like the default anchoring that Apple has, and you need to like define your own anchors, right? And so lines like 48 through like 53 go through that. And so in the comments above, like there are some like useful anchors that you might want, right? So like let's say for here, right? Like I want my like form to be like, like at like the very like top of like the page, right? Then I would like say, let my top anchor, be equal to, right, like the top anchor of the view of like the iPhone, right? And safe area layout guide basically just tells you like, for example, like on iPhones, there's like a little section here for the camera, right? Like if you were to like not do like safe area layout guide, like top anchor, like your form would like run over to like essentially like where my mouse is right now. Like part of it could be like covered by like this camera part up top. You don't want that. So we always want to use like safe area layout guide. Right. And then like let's say like I want it to be, all right, so let's say like, all right, I set the top anchor. Now I just want it to always be like height 50, no matter like what device I'm using. Then I like use the height anchor. But like, let's say like, maybe you don't know if you want it to be like 50 or not. Maybe you just want to like anchor it like bottom to like somewhere, like the bottom of the screen. Then you would say like my form dot like bottom anchor dot constraint. And then you would want that to be equal to, let's say, right, the bottom of the screen, self dot view dot save area layout guide dot bottom anchor. And what you should see is now like the form taking up the entire screen, right? Because it's anchored to the bottom of the save area view. So I guess like one thing to note is you can't define top, bottom, and height at once. You can only define like 2 of the 3. So basically it's like, if you define height, you can't define like bottom if you've already defined top. Or like if you could define bottom and height, but you don't have to like define top, for example. So I'm just going to change that back to 50 really quickly. And then of course there's like left right anchors as well, right? Like leading anchor is left, trailing anchor is right. And here I'm saying like, let my leading anchor be like also constrained to like where the view is, but at an offset of 50, right? Otherwise, like let's say if I just had this as 0, then what it would look like is is this updates? Is this updated? It would essentially just like start straight at the edge of the screen. And that doesn't look that great, right? So like that's why like we use like some sort of like variable name, or some sort of like offset usually from like the edge of the screen. Yeah, for some reason I don't know, the view isn't updating though. But yeah. So any questions on that so far? That was a lot, sorry. But basically it's like formatting for how you want to like display your elements on the screen. Okay. So, right. So then I guess that was clear then. Sorry, if you scroll down, I'm basically just like formatting the rest of like all the other elements. So it's like nothing really to go over there. I guess like one thing to note is like buttons, which are probably going to be used a lot in your projects. So buttons have more properties than like labels, for example, just because you like press buttons and you expect them to respond to things. And so here, I'm saying like when like the button state is normal, like it's unpressed, like just display press me. Otherwise, if it's pressed, display like something else. And so in order, you can like test that by, oh God, in your canvas, there was like a play button up there. And so if you like press me, right now it's like pressed, right? It's just being pressed rather than press me. So that's like a cool trick you can use. You can also like change like the background color on press, etc. And then right, and I guess like another thing is sort of like a JavaScript equivalent to like add like event handler or add event is like add target for like buttons. And so that's what line 79 is doing here. So you're saying like act on like myself, and then action is like basically a link to like what function to call when you're doing that for like all touch events, or maybe like only like touch on the inside. You can like define all that here. So for example, let's see, you can like explore like all editing events, all touch events, like editing change, like maybe you want it only to like change when you drag on it, so yeah, so you can, customize your app like that. And so to go over where like this change text is, let's scroll down to like 998. And so here, you see like an interesting looking function with like an at Objective-C. And like I mentioned in like the first workshop, Objective-C was like I guess the legacy version of like legacy code that was used to like develop like the first iOS apps. So basically like, all target functions now need Objective-C as a description. I'm not like too sure on exactly why. Maybe like Jack can go into more depth on that. But basically, if you want like a target function, like to respond to like, let's say like a slider press or like a button, you need to like add the Objective C. And then inside like the function parameters, you're basically saying like what is, like when is this going to be called, or by whom, or by what. And then here, like, so that's what sender is saying. And then you define that as like a UI button. That may or may not exist, which is why you have like the option here. And like I guess another thing to note is, so you see like this like underscore before the sender. And so remember how in the Swift syntax playground, like I said that like when you call a function, you need to like define explicitly like, oh, I'm sending this variable in as parameter. But if you add the underscore, you won't have to like essentially like define like explicitly like what that sender is going to be. So for example, if you scroll back up here to like when this function is actually called, right? I don't have to like explicitly write out like sender UI button, right? Instead all I have to do is like I can just like leave it like as blank almost. And so yeah, that's usually the case for targets. Target functions. But right, so then I guess like here you can just like play with like what you want the code to do. Like when you like press it or you not press it. So one, like, you can like have the button change the text based on like what the label is, etc. Right. And then I guess like another Objective-C function that could be useful if you want to like put on like input fields is I don't know if this is okay right now. But like on text field to change, right? Like so if like your user types something in there, like set like maybe like the label to reflect what your user typed. So yeah, that's another thing. I don't know. Yeah, for some reason it's not letting me do that right now. But oh God. But yeah, so you can like play with it in the canvas though. Like just type something and I think it should, like the text should show up in what the label is in the green. All right, and then down here, I guess is one more thing UI element I'd like to go over that you might find useful is just like a UI image view. And as you can see here, like you have like you can just like display an image, and how that works is first you need to like define a UI image, which is different from like other images like CG images, which stands for like core graphics image. But basically like UI image is what you want displayed on the screen, and like CG image or like some other image is like what you would like want to manipulate. For example, like let's say like let's say like you're making like, I don't know, like a healthcare app, and you have like, you want to take a picture of something, like let's say like you press the take the picture button, and then you want to like edit the picture somehow, crop it. You're not going to be able to crop a UI image. You would need to like first convert it to like a core graphics image and then like manipulate the image there, for example. So that's just like an instance of where you wouldn't use a UI image. But basically, if you want to display it on the screen, you need a UI image. And you're setting the image views image to be that UI image, and then you're laying that out. And in order to like, I guess like import images, but also going back to workshop 1, what you need to do is like just like you can literally just drag and drop like, I don't know, like a JPEG or like a PNG into here, into the assets folder, and then all you need to do then is just like, remember like the name of the image you just dropped, and then just like, just insert into the parameter field inside the UI image. Okay. Any questions on that? So any questions on, I guess, like buttons, like importing other assets? Does that like, if like, I guess like briefly, if as you guys briefly like look through the code, or do you guys have any questions on like any part of the code in this file in HomeView controller? Okay, so I'm guessing no, just based on the silence. But if you do have a question, feel free to like interrupt or just like type it in the chat. And like either Jack or Nat will be able to answer those. So now I guess I first want to go through how to like actually run this app rather than like just in Canvas. And all right, so let's do that. So in order to do that, what you want to do is you see like this big play button in like the top left. You just want to press that, and essentially, it'll take a while to compile. I do believe. But a simulator should be starting, unless something is wrong. Okay. All right. So I don't. So what I just did was I just did Command R. So that's just like a shortcut for running it. So in case like pressing that big play button wasn't working, you can just do that Command R. And then as you see here on the bottom of my screen, like you see like a simulator popping up. And you'll see like up here on the top it says like it's launching the app. And so it'll take a while on the first launch. Let me bring my simulator over to. But so this is what the simulator will look like. And like I said, the first run it usually takes a while. But right, all right. So a lot of things. So first, you see like this hello world, and you're like, what the heck, man? Like, why is it saying hello world? Like, I want to see this screen, right? I want to see like the colorful like text fields and like the image and everything. Like, why is it saying hello world? And right, so you go and you start to try to debug, and then you realize like, well, content view shows the hello world view basically, and but I don't want content view to be displayed. So how do I like change that to like home view controller? And so the answer lies in the scene delegate. And so like I mentioned in workshop 1, scene delegate basically controls like what you see on your screen, like when you launch it, for example, while like app delegate controls like the life cycle, as in like what happens when you launch it, or like when it's in background mode, etc. And so if you go to line 26, you'll see like a to-do comment over here. And well, if we look, we'll see that we're not showing the home view controller because we're launching, right? In line 32, we're setting the root view controller to be the content view, right? So we're not even using home view controller. Like we made it, but we're never using it. So let's do that, right? So in order to do that, if we follow the to-do, we'll just comment out the content view. And we'll make first a home view controller, right? We'll make it a constant because we don't want to like, make like multiple home view controllers. And we'll just make it like an instance of the home view controller class, right? That we declared up here. So the parentheses indicates that we're making an instance of it. And so I guess like one thing you could do is you could just say, like just set window.rootViewController equals home VC. And that will like launch your app with like the home view controller as the root view controller. But one thing to keep a note is that usually like on your apps, you want like multiple views, right? And so what that means is like you want to be able to like navigate from like one view to another and like go back to the previous like page you were at like pretty easily. But if you just use like a view controller by itself, that doesn't really like come with like the navigation function. So you want to like add that in somehow. And so to introduce you to like another iOS concept, we're gonna make like a navigation controller, which essentially allows you to like go back and forth between pages really easily. And let me see if I have a good example of this. So to show you what I'm talking about, I guess like You're right. So I don't know if none of the apps on the simulator are good at this, but if you like, for example, if everyone like goes on their phones for a second and like goes to like I think like a great example of this is like the news app, like the Apple News app. So if you go on the Apple News app, right, and like you press on like you literally like press on an article, it'll like take you to like that article, right? And if you scroll down, you'll see more articles. And so you press on like another article. And so you're just like going on like this essentially like this like trail of articles, right? But like you can always go back to the previous article you were at, right? Like the previous page before that until you're like back to like the main page on the Apple News app. And so that's what like a navigation controller will allow you to do. So right, so back to the code in line 29, we're going to make a UI navigation controller essentially to embed all that like ability to like navigate between pages. And so we're going to set the review controller here to then just be like home VC. So right now we just have home VC, but eventually we'll have like more. And so in line 34, then you also want to change window.review controller, not to be like directly the view controller, but actually like navigation controller. And so that embeds all that information in. And so now when you run Command R, you will see like the page coming up. And I think it's black on my simulator because I might have like the simulator set to like reflect the background of my phone or something. So you can of course like edit that by inside view did load, just like saying self dot view dot background color equals like oops, that's not equal sign, equals like dot like white, for example. And then if you quit that, so I guess like one of the convenient things about simulators, if you make a change, like you're gonna have to rerun it, versus like in Canvas, it'll just like update it simultaneously. But yeah, so now you can see like the background is white and you can see everything. Yeah, and so yeah, so this is how the app like how to like get started like actually like running an app. So does anyone have any questions there? Does Xcode automatically compile when you run? Yes. So it automatically builds when you run, but sometimes when you run, it's not going to build. And so you can just like Command B and that'll just build without running. So if I pause this for a sec, I press Command B, then you'll see like, you know, build succeeded. And then like once your build succeeds, you can be like, you know, Command R and it'll just like run automatically. Yeah, and I guess those are all here under the product. But you'll mostly be using build and run, like tests, I guess, if you make unit tests. Okay. All right, so got through like the basic UI elements. And so we have like around like 2 minutes left. And before we leave, I want to go over like start setting up for like the next session, which is where we're going to talk about a specific view type that you will see a lot of called a UI table view. And so in order to do that, let's first make a UI table view file. So how we're going to do that is if you go to file, you click on new, right? You can click on file again. So it's over there, or just Command N. And so here you can see like all these like types of files you can create, right? You can create like a Swift UI view, a storyboard, etc. Core data for like storing like, I don't know, data, like users, all that stuff. But usually what we want is like a Swift file or like a Cocoa Touch class. So Swift file is, well, it's just like a plain Swift file. But like Cocoa Touch class is like essentially like any class that has to do with like the UI. So we're going to create a Cocoa Touch class. And as you can see here, you can make it a subclass of many different things, like a UI view controller, or just like a UI view, collection view cell, et cetera, et cetera. So usually we're going to be using these ones over here. So I'm going to create a UI table view controller. So right, and we'll just call this class movie table view controller, because I don't know if you guys read the README for the GitHub, but we're basically going to be making like an app that'll like display a list of movies. So right, so once you do that, make sure you're in Swift, not Objective-C. And we'll click next. And I'll just ask you where you want your file to be. And so usually this is the correct place. So just click create. And now you will have a movie table view controller. And so let's take a look at what this is going to look like. So if you just go to home view controller, scroll to the bottom, what you can do is, so remember that this like sort of little segment of code from Swift UI allows us to display essentially what we can see in Canvas right now. So we're just going to take that and then copy and paste it and then put it at the end of the movie table view. And just be sure, so now it's going to like throw a bunch of complaints. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to say like, switch the view controller to the movie table view controller. And we can't call this like main preview, so we'll just call this like movie table preview. And then you just like place all this with movie table preview. Sorry, it is now telling me, okay, now it's happy. So it usually takes a little second to be happy, but let's open Canvas. All right, and cool. So now you can open Canvas, and if you run this, you will see a blank screen, which is not great. So what we're gonna do is in the functions here, right? So if you see it's like number of sections is 0, number of rows in section is also 0. Like, you know, like of course we're not going to see anything because we don't even have like, you know, haven't declared like the number of sections or the number of cells we want to see. So we're just going to change line 26 to 1 and line like 31 to like, I don't know, like 10 or something. And then let's see if this reloads. Crashed yet. Okay, well that's not supposed to happen. Let's see. Okay, so return a nil cell for, okay, so basically, right, so you're not dequeuing any cells, right? If you look here at diagnostics, so a table view like will have cells, which you'll probably can't really understand now, but if we go ahead and uncomment this next function here, what it does, I'll go into this more into depth in the next workshop, but it essentially like shows like what sort of cells we are, what we're going to be displaying inside the table. So if I dequeue that, or if I uncomment that, oh my god. Okay, so right, so if you look in here, it's like dequeue reusable cell with identifier, reuse identifier, but we haven't registered that. So we're gonna have to, sorry, this is taking expected. So we're gonna have to essentially register a cell with that reuse identifier. So let's just all right, so I'm just gonna self dot table view. Let's see. Dot register a subclass. Let's just call this just like a basic UI table view cell. Oops, I don't think I need that. First cell reuse identifier. Reuse identifier. Nice. Okay. And then try this again. Oh, oops, that's not how you spell cell. All right, and so now this is happy. And as you see here, you have like a bunch of cells, or like 10 cells exactly. And let's say we want, to display some sort of text, then we'll say cell dot text no label. Oops. Text label. That's fine. Just call this account. So now I think if I run this. Okay, so text label dot text. Sure. Now it's happy because so basically what happened there was like text label is a UI label, and a UI label has a text property, and so you need to set like the property rather than the label to be a string because UI label isn't a string. So yeah, and as you can see here, we have an optional type because like if I commented this line out, right, then text label is technically nil, but you don't want the app to crash, right? If you just don't have text on the cell, which is why we have it optional. But like maybe the user does want to use like the label. So then you you also want to handle that case as well, which is why now you can like see words on the screen. But yeah, so this is just gonna set up the next session where we'll be like manipulating. We'll talk more about like UI table view and like how to like define custom cells, etc. All right, so yeah, so sorry we ran over again. There's a lot of content, but if you have any questions, please stay on afterwards. Otherwise, I'll see you in like 23 more minutes. But yeah, I will stop the recording right now.